Kiddushin Daf Yomi is Amud Aleph, Psychology and Halacha, Halacha Ka'abaya beYa'el Kagam. We've learned in our discussion about Abaya Verova, we mentioned yesterday as well, the completely different worldviews that they have, which leads them to 428 different differences of opinion throughout Shas. Of those 428, we paskin like Rova in all of them except 6. The 6 in which we paskin like Abaya are referred to both in our Gemara and in many other places in Shas as Ya'el Kagam, which Rashi says is Simanei halachot hen shenechleku behem Abaya Verova uvechol makom halacha karova chutz me'elu. Ya'el Kagam is an acronym which represents the 6 cases in Shas where we paskin like Abaya and not like Rova. And you can have some fun. You all know other people who are learning Torah. You all know Rabbonim, you all know Talmidei Chachamim. Ask them, why do we paskin like Abaya in the 6 cases of Ya'el Kagam? I doubt you're going to get a whole lot of answers. This is something that has troubled me all my life. I've asked people, I've looked, I've researched, I've tried to find. Nobody talks about Ya'el Kagam. Why do we paskin like Abaya? Why we paskin like Rova? We've got the piece of Rav Kook in Ein Ra'ah, which I referred to in Gittin Daf Chof Beis, and we'll learn in more detail this morning. Why the 6 exceptions? For that, I haven't found anybody who explains. And I've mentioned it before, the Reishis Chochmah says, when you learn Torah in those hours where night becomes day, during that time, the Shekhinah is present with you. The Shekhinah, the Reishis Chochmah says, the Shekhinah is sitting opposite you at the table. And helps you clarify from night to day. That which is obscure becomes clarified. It's a very, very special time. Especially in my case, where I use that time to prepare for you, both the people who are sitting here and the people who are not sitting here. So there's extra siyata dishmaya. And this morning, the Rebbeinu Shem gave me the schus of understanding something that I've never ever understood before, nor have I found anybody else who understands it. And you, because you've taken the effort to be here this morning, are going to learn the answer to that. So you can have some fun with others. Ask Talmidei Chachamim, why do we paskin like Abaya and Ya'el Kagam? And see how many answers you get. I would be interested in hearing. So the Ya'el Kagam, we'll go through them. These are the 3 cases, one of which is our Gemara of Kiddushin she'einam mesurim lebiyah, which we discussed yesterday, an act of Kiddushin which doesn't lead naturally to intimacy. It can't lead to intimacy. Is that Kiddushin? Isn't that Kiddushin? Abaya says it is, Rova says it isn't. They both agree with the principle that Kiddushin she'einam mesurim lebiyah lav biyah, that if Kiddushin can't lead to biyah, that is not a valid Kiddushin. But the interpretation of that statement, they differ, each one according to their worldview, Abaya and Rova. Let's look at the Ein Hara'o in greater detail than we did last time. And firstly, all the Ein Hara'o goes into is why we generally paskin like Rova. He doesn't go into why we sometimes don't paskin like Rova. He only goes into why we generally do paskin like Rova. There are some Talmidei Chachamim whose understanding of Hashem is through clear, defined principles. כמו על ידי בירור החוכמות בדברים המוחשים לאמיתתם, לעמוד על סודם וסדרם, ודעת התורה להלכותיה ופרטותיה. Like the understanding of halacha in all its detail, that's how they come to an understanding of Hashem. They get close to Hashem through an analysis of detailed halacha. And they become very close to Hashem through immersing themselves and completely immersing themselves and submersing themselves into the details of halacha. Clear 4 amot, it must be measurable, it must be visible. That's how we work with halacha, not with all the mystical things and that's not where they go. ויודעים את שמו יתברך, וישנה כאלו שבטבע נפשם אינם יכולים להסתפק בדרישת הדברים המוגבלים. And then there are some people who just aren't satisfied with them. והם מתרוממים לשוטט ברעיונות בהכרת רוממות כאל יתברך. And they float around the heavens, exploring ideas of godliness. בהשערה פנימית, using an inner awareness, בהיגיון נעלה, with a very high intelligence that sits inside them. ובזה אינם מצומצמים אל פרטי נתיבות דברים קצובים ומוגבלים. So they're not limited by the very defined areas of halacha. ויותר ממה שיש לדבר בפה ולשון הם מרגישים בהיגיון לבבן. because more than can be articulated in one's mouth or with a pen, they experience more of that in their hearts and in their higher levels. ומרוממות ההיגיון הפנימי מכירים גם כן ההכרח שמחייב את ההשלמה האנושית לבוא על ידיו השיעבוד לדרישה ולקיום של כל הדברים המוגבלים מחוכמה ודרישת התורה ופרטיה. They don't stay floating around there. That's a terrible thing. Those people who stay floating around in mysticism and all these things, and they're into the Zohar and all that, and they never come down into Shulchan Aruch, that's a problem. But those individuals who need the upper reaches of understanding, and they go there and they explore the ways of Hashem, and then they come back down and they infuse that into Shas and Poskim, Shulchan Aruch, and that's the way they learn. That's another kind of Talmid Chacham. Both of them work with the areas of Shulchan Aruch, both of them work with Halacha. One restricts himself to the area of Halacha, and one opens himself to these higher planes of thinking, thinks internally and intuitively, uses right brain, not only left brain, and then comes back into the left brain area. And that's like the Rambam says in Moreh Nevuchim on the posuk of Olim v'Yordim, the angels that went up and down the ladder. Ki bihiyoto ole el hamusagim harechavim bihiyayon lev hakarat romamut Hashem yitbarach lamitato. For after having gone up into these higher reaches of godliness and of the divine principles and ideas, and now your mind is up there, if you're one of those people that operates in that Kabbalistic area, then your reidim ze lechaven hanaga medinit hamugbelet. You bring that back down. You don't stay up on the top of the ladder. You come back down and you learn Halacha, you learn Gemara, Rashi, Tosfos. That's where you operate. You bring the higher ideas into it, but that's where you operate. You both agree that that's where you've got to operate. When it comes to action, when it comes to Halacha, which is the Chokhmah HaMa'asit, practical wisdom, the one who restricts himself to the visible and the measurable is closer to halachic decisiveness than the one who floats around. They said about Rabbi Meir, his peers couldn't understand him. It was too esoteric. And so the halacha is not like him. You can't paskin like somebody you don't understand. Somebody comes and talks about all these bigger things and these higher things. You can't paskin halacha like him. That's very easy. You've got to understand him. You've got to be able to reason with him. You've got to be able to debate with him. And that's why the halacha is like Rava. We talked about the difference between Rava and Abaye, and that when Rav Yosef asked them as little children where Hashem is, the one pointed to the ceiling inside the Beis HaMedrash, one went outside and looked at the sky and said, there's Hashem. Just different approaches. They are both holy ways, both of them correct, both of them true. But the one who restricts himself to the pure halachic detail and doesn't float around the world is closer to halachic decisiveness, and therefore the halacha is like Rava. That's good, fine, I understand, get that, that's beautiful. But why do we paskin like Abaye in 6 cases? And if you look at the 6 cases, there's no common denominator. There's nothing common about the 6. As I said to you, the Rebbeinu Shalom today led me to a tzlach in Masechta Sanhedrin. The tzach doesn't answer the question, but in something else he's troubled about, he gives us a key. And with the key we can get it. That's how, David, you asked earlier, did I find something on it? And I said, no, I understood something. There are 2 ways to get clarity. You can find something that somebody else has said, and you can understand something you've never understood before. Those are 2 different ways to get clarity. The tzlach gives us a key. The tzlach asks the question, why this order of Ya'el Kagam? Rashi gives us, is Yeush Shelo Midat. The din of if somebody lost some property and he doesn't yet know he's lost it, but when he does find out, he gives up hope of ever finding it again. What happens if somebody picked it up a day before he realized he lost it? Has he given up hope or hasn't he given up? He doesn't even know he's lost it. That's the first case of Ya'el, Yush Shalom Midat. And that's in Bava Metzia, and then he jumps to Eid Zomeim, which is Sanhedrin, and then he goes back to Chai HaOmed Me'elav. You put an animal just stands in the midst of where there needs to be an Eruv, and the animal is breaching the gap. Nobody put him there, he's just standing there. While he's standing there, is that a good close of the gap? Machlokes Abaye and Rava. Then we're going back to Eruvin. Then we come to Kiddushin, and then we've got Gittin, and then we've got Sanhedrin. Says the Tzlach, who's the Noda B'Yehuda, the Rov in Prague, the Dayan in Prague in the 18th century, one of the greatest halachic minds of our times, and he wrote, in addition to the Noda B'Yehuda, which are the Shalos Utshuvos, which we use in Halacha, he wrote the Tzlach on Shas as well. And so he's troubled by this. Why this order? And he says an amazing things. And he says, Rava is not disproved in all of these cases. There are only 2 places out of the 6 where Rava is disproved. One of them is our Gemara. In our Gemara, just the line before ours, they ask a question that puts Rava aside. He says, but the other 4, Rava isn't pushed aside. So why don't we paskin like Rava? Ela shashitahu kach lefi she'itotev Rava b'yeush memela b'tela da'ato gam be'ed zomem. Because we disproved Rava in the first case of Yud, Ya'el, which is Yeush, giving up hope. Since in that piece of Gemara, in Bava Metzia, Daf Chaf Aleph, we disprove Rava, that breaks Rava's force in all of the others, one after the other. It's like a domino effect. Avuhon de kulo yeyu shemisham hitchil hatiyufte litzmoach lechol hani. The questions on Rava started growing organically out of the first one of Yehi Shalom Midat. So Ya'el Kagam is the order of logical breakdown of Rava in these 6 cases. And I say it gave me the key because that meant I had to learn the first one very carefully. If we go to Yehi Shalom Midat in Masechtes Bava Metzia, we might understand why we paskin like Abai in that case, and then we'll understand in the others. So if you look on the next page, I've got them tabulated, the various cases. Yehi Shalom Midat, Abaya holds it's not Yeush. Abaya says, if I lose something on Sunday, but I don't know. On Wednesday, I discover I've lost it, and there's no hope of finding it back. There's no siman. It's not something I can even identify. It's gone. It's finished. So I give up hope. From that time onwards, if anybody finds it, there's no question, it's theirs. But what happens if somebody picked it up on Monday or on Tuesday? Is it theirs, or the fact that I have not yet given up hope because I didn't know I've lost it, does that mean that it isn't theirs? Abaya says, Eino Yeush. No, Yeush only starts when you actually give up hope. You can't apply it retrospectively and say, since when you give up hope, the reason you're giving up hope, doesn't have a siman, it doesn't have an identifying mark on it. It's never had an identifying mark on it. So now, when does the giving up apply from? From the moment you lost it. But I wasn't conscious at the moment I lost it. So you go through these various different cases. What I found is, Rava generally holds, we don't look at the psychology. We don't look at the people's intention and the spirituality, and then it's just the facts in front of us. What's in front of us? But the beauty is Abaya. Abaya doesn't just say, no, we do look at the psychology. Abaya says, it depends. And in these 6 cases, what Abaya is saying is, I believe even Rava should agree with me here. Even through Rava's worldview, these 6 cases are different. And in these cases, he should agree with me, because Abaya says, there are times when the intention and the psychology of the individual is core to the facts. You can't look at the physical facts without the intention. And there are times when they're not. And the beauty of Abaya being able to say it's not all or nothing, it's not black or white. Do you look at the psychology or don't you? Do you look at intention or don't you? It depends. How important is intention to the facts on the ground? Me, says Abaya, I look at intention a lot of times, but Rava doesn't. But in these 6 cases, sometimes you should be looking at intention and he doesn't, and sometimes you shouldn't be looking at intention and he does, because he's stuck in his framework. He's stuck in an inflexible mindset. And you've got to be flexible, says Abaya. And we paskin like Abaya in these 6 cases, that even you, Rava, should be flexible in these cases. And so, for example, in Yehi Shalom Midat, is this about kavanah or not? So the question is, I pick up the article on Sunday. The question is, have you given up hope? Is that a psychological question or a factual question? You can't separate them. The fact is the psychology of it. Did you give up hope? At that time, you didn't give up hope. You, Rava, who likes to look at things as they are at that moment, you should agree that that's not Yeush, which is what Abaya holds. Eid Zomeim, the Gemara discusses, a man becomes an Eid Zomeim, he's proved a false witness. But he gives evidence on Sunday, and he's proved a false witness on Thursday. Was he a false witness from Sunday, so any other evidence he gave in between is also possible, or does he only become a false witness from Thursday onwards? Abaya says, in this case, we go back to the beginning. Here we do go back to the beginning. Why? Because whether a person is a false witness or not depends on whether he's a rasha or not. Al tashet rasha eid, you're not allowed to make a rasha a witness. When did he become a rasha? Not when he was proved a false witness. He became a rasha when he gave false evidence. So there we look at when his intention was to give false evidence right at the beginning. You don't look at the technicality of when you became an eid zomeim. Here you've got to go for intention. The animal that's being used for an eruv, says Abaye, this is a technical question. Is the animal filling the space or isn't it? Who cares about the intention? The animal's intention, the owner's intention, why he was put, that's irrelevant. Does he close the gap or doesn't he? Why are we looking at intention? Rava says he wasn't put there for the purpose of an eruv. Says Abaye, Rava, even according to you, who cares? Why are you getting involved in intention in all cases? In case of an eruv, it's dinu kelechi, it's a good eruv. Kiddushin. The idea of Kiddushin shelo nimsuru lebia, the word nimsuru is important. And we see the word mosur, there's a Gemara in Yuma that we had on Daf Pehei, where we learned that pikuach nefesh permits chilul Shabbos, that if somebody's life is to be saved, you can break the Shabbos. And Rabbi Yonasan there says, Ki kodesh ilachem, hi mesura beyadchem velo atem mesurim beyada. You are not trapped into Shabbos. Shabbos is a tool for you. And where you've got to save somebody's life, you have the authority to break Shabbos for that. It's under your control. So you see the word masur means, is this an instrument or is this an end in itself? Rabbi Yonasan is saying Shabbos is not an end in itself, it's an instrument that you've got to use. And so when we say Kiddushin masura lebia or not, shenimsuru lebia, is this Kiddushin, was the intention of the Kiddushin to have intimacy? That's what you've got to look at. That's what masur means. Is the Kiddushin a vehicle for intimacy? If a man marries a mother and his daughter simultaneously, is his intention to have intimacy? Can't possibly be. Can't have intimacy with either of them. So clearly his intention was just to make them forbidden to everybody else. It wasn't, including him, it was just to ruin their lives. His intention was not to marry them. That's clear. But a person says, I want to marry one of these identical twins. I actually don't care which one it is. They're identical twins. I'll marry one of them, whichever. Is his intention to have intimacy? Yes, it is. Says Abaye, in this case, you do look at intention. And you say, since his intention, the Kiddushin was nimsuru lebia, the purpose of the Kiddushin was bia. And therefore, it's a valid Kiddushin. They need a get. They can't live together because of the technical problems, but they need a get. Because in this case, you do need to look at intention. Gili da'ata begita, a person writes a get with good intention, a fully kosher get, and then he says, I've changed my mind, but he doesn't cancel the get. And the get's being sent by a shaliach, it's been sent by UPS, and it hasn't got to the destination yet. And he says, I've changed my mind. Says Abaye, it's still a get. Because once the get has been made with kavanah, when do you need intention? When you write the get. Once the get is written with intention, the get is kosher. How do you undo a kosher get? You've got to be mevatel pair. You've got to say it out loud. You can't just have an intention. Says Abaye, therefore it remains a kosher get. His intention doesn't matter. And Rava, you should agree with that at that point you're dealing with a real get. How can the get be undone because he says, I've changed my mind? You, Rava, should agree with this. And the question is, there a person eats treif just dafka? Is he allowed to be a witness? And Abaye says, no, he's not allowed to be a witness, because if he eats treif dafka, he'll tell lies in court dafka as well. You can't trust him at all, because he doesn't have yiras shamayim. He's not afraid of the Ribono Shel Olam, and therefore his intention is important. What kind of person? We're looking about a kosher eidus. Is this person allowed to give witness? It depends. What kind of person is he? What is that going to depend on? He eats treif, okay. Does he eat treif just because he enjoys it and he can't hold himself back? Okay, then he's like all of us. We all do wrong things because we got a yetzer hara. But if he does it lahachitz, that's a certain type of person. That's a person you can't trust. That's a different geder altogether. There you need it. So in all these cases, the reason we can't find a common denominator is because sometimes Abaye says you follow the kavanah, and sometimes he says you don't follow kavanah. The common denominator is they all have to do with kavanah. They all have to do with intention. But there's not consistency. The way I'm explaining it is, and that's the beauty of it, that there's not consistency. That's why we paskin like Abaye here. Because in matters of the mind, you can't just lay it out. We're dealing with halacha. You can't just deal with it technically. You're dealing with the human dimension within halacha. So you've got to now analyze to what, even if you are Rava, that's the beauty. Abaye is saying, I'm not even just saying this for me. Rava, you should agree with me. Even you who just look at the facts on the ground. In these cases, some of them, intention is part of the fact on the ground, and therefore intention should apply. Where intention is not part of the facts on the ground, we shouldn't worry about intention. And each one of them has its actual reason. And although we paskin like Abaya and not like Rava in this particular sugya, the sugya goes to a lot of lengths to understand Rava and to explain Rava. And the Ritvo mentions in the name of his Rebbe, the Ramban, his Rebbe's Rebbe, that often the Gemara will reason even shalol halacha. There's a big difference in reasoning in halachic decisions. The halacha is like Rava in 422 of the cases. That doesn't mean that Abaya's reasoning is not used in halakhic reasoning. Any reasoning that is in the Gemara is valid reasoning in the halakhic process. In terms of psak, how do we actually paskin? That's a different thing. And to be able to use the reasoning, even when the reasoning leads to a conclusion that is not al pi halacha, that doesn't disqualify the reasoning if it's in the Gemara. If it's part of Gemara, then it's part of the body of reasoning that forms Torah reasoning, that forms Torah thinking. So that's the reason that even though we paskin like Rava, in all cases of their machlokes, in Ya'il Kagam, these 6 cases, we paskin like Abaya because the way Abaya explains it, Rava should agree. He doesn't. But we follow Abaya because in these places, we don't just blindly say halacha is always like Rava. There's a reason why halacha is like Rava. And that reason doesn't apply in these 6 cases.